Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a huge challenge in ecology: invasive species. Specifically, how can we figure out ahead of time which non-native species will cause the most ecological harm?
It's a critical question. Invasive alien species, IAS, are a massive threat to biodiversity globally.
Right, and we need ways to predict their impact before ecosystems collapse.
Exactly. For a long time, we've really lacked a universal standard way to predict both the likelihood and, importantly, the degree of ecological damage an invader might cause, especially for species we haven't seen invade before.
And this isn't just academic. International agreements like the Aichi targets and EU regulations, they demand better predictive tools. We can't just wait and see anymore.
Which brings us to the paper we're diving into today. It's titled Invader Relative Impact Potential, RIP, a new metric to understand and predict the ecological impacts of existing, emerging, and future invasive alien species. The lead author is Jamie T.A. Dick.
Okay, RIP. Sounds dramatic, but fitting. So their goal was to create a metric that actually works for prediction.
Pretty much. A simple, robust formula to tackle this prediction gap.
All right, so this new metric, RIP, it didn't just appear out of thin air, right? What ecological ideas did they build upon?
No, it builds on solid foundations. They essentially blended two classic ecological concepts. First, there's the idea of total response, or TR.
TR, okay.
Historically, in predator-prey studies, TR is defined as the functional response, FR, multiplied by the numerical response, NR.
Let's break those down quickly. Functional response versus numerical response. What's the difference in simple terms?
Okay, think of functional response, FR, as the consumer's individual efficiency. Like how quickly does one predator eat prey as the prey becomes more available? It's about the per capita effect, how voracious one individual is.
So one hungry mouth.
Right. The numerical response, NR, is about the population. How does the consumer population grow or aggregate in response to resources? More mouths appearing, basically.
Got it. Individual hunger times population boom. What was the second piece they incorporated?
The second piece was the Parker-Lonsdale equation. It's often used in invasion science. It states that impact I equals the invader's range, R times its abundance, A times its per capita effect, E.
Okay, range times abundance times effect. And I see a connection here. That effect term sounds a lot like the functional response you just mentioned.
Exactly. The author saw that E in Parker-Lonsdale is essentially the same concept as FR from the total response model. It's the per individual impact.
But both these older models had a practical problem, didn't they? Something that made them hard to use for rapid predictions.
They did. The big stumbling block, especially with total response, was the numerical response, NR.
Why is that?
Well, NR is just notoriously difficult to measure reliably. It involves time lags, complex population dynamics, reproduction rates, movement. It's messy and takes a long time to figure out.
Not ideal if you need a quick assessment tool.
Definitely not. It's too complex, too nebulous for the kind of standardized metric needed for, say, policy decisions.
So the Dick et al. Paper proposed a workaround for this difficult NR measurement.
Yes, and this is really the key practical insight. They proposed substituting the complex numerical response, NR, with something much easier to estimate: consumer abundance, AB.
Abundance. Just how many of them are there?
Pretty much. Field abundance or density. They argue that abundance effectively captures the outcome of all those complex NR processes: aggregation, reproduction, resource assimilation, but in a single measurable snapshot.
That seems much more feasible for fieldwork. Much simpler.
Way simpler. And this substitution is what allows them to formulate the new metric. Relative impact potential, or RIP.
Okay, so let's see it. What's the actual formula for RIP?
The formula is elegant in its structure. It's a ratio. RIP equals the functional response of the invader divided by the functional response of a native comparator, all multiplied by the abundance of the invader divided by the abundance of that same native comparator.
So RIP for ecological, it's all relative.
Yeah.
Why compare to a native species? Don't just look at the invader's FR and abundance on their own.
That comparison to a native analog is absolutely crucial. It sets the ecological context.
How so?
Because ecosystems already have consumers. The native comparator represents the baseline level of consumption and impact that the ecosystem is, adapted to through coevolution. The question RIP answers isn't just, is the invader impactful, but is the invader significantly more impactful than the species it's potentially replacing or competing with? Okay. So it anchors the measurement in the existing ecological reality. Makes sense. And the FR part of the formula, is that the whole feeding curve or a specific point?
Good question. For the RIP calculation, they typically use the estimated maximum feeding rate from the functional response, the asymptote, basically. How much can it eat when prey is super abundant?
Right. And abundance is just density or numbers in the field.
Usually, yes. Or sometimes biomass, particularly if the invader and native differ hugely in size.
Okay, so you calculate this RIP score. What do the numbers mean? How do you interpret the result?
It's quite intuitive. If the RIP score is less than 1, the invader has less impact than the native.
Correct. If RIP equals 1, its impact is essentially the same as the native's no added pressure, theoretically,
But the crucial one,
is when RIP is greater than 1. That predicts a likely ecological impact. And the higher the score above 1, the greater the predicted magnitude of that impact.
that's clear. Can you give us a concrete example? Show us how this worked with a real invasion.
Sure. A classic case study they used involves a freshwater amphipod, like a little shrimp, called Gammarus pulex. It invaded areas in Ireland previously occupied by the native Gammarus dubini celticus.
Okay, an invader replacing a native shrimp.
Exactly. So they measured the functional responses, the maximum feeding rates of both the invader G. pulex and the native GD celticus on key prey items like mayfly nymphs and blackfly larvae. They also measured their relative abundances in the field where they co-occurred.
And then plugged those FR and abundance values into the RIP formula.
Yep. And the results were striking. For mayfly nymphs, the RIP score for the invader was 10.96. For blackfly larvae, it was 13.94.
Whoa. Over 10 times the relative impact potential compared to the native species it was replacing.
Precisely. And critically, these high RIP scores lined up perfectly with what ecologists had already observed in the field. Dramatic declines in those specific mayfly and blackfly populations, and indeed overall biodiversity crashes wherever G. pulex invaded and replaced the native.
So the prediction retrospectively matched the known ecological disaster.
It did. It was strong validation right there.
That's compelling. How widely did they test this metric beyond that one case? Was it just crustaceans?
No, they aimed for broad applicability. The study compiled data from 22 different invaderative systems. This covered a really diverse range: predators, herbivores, different animal groups, even plants where you can derive analogous consumption rates.
Oh, plants too. Interesting.
Yeah, leading to 47 distinct comparisons in total across these varied systems.
Okay, 47 comparisons. Now, you mentioned functional response. FR alone was already somewhat useful for prediction.
It was, yes. Looking at just the FR ratio, invader FR, native FR, did successfully predict impact in 39 out of those 47 cases. So not bad. Individual efficiency matters.
But adding abundance into the full RIP formula, that was the game changer.
That was the leap. When they calculated the full RIP metric, incorporating both relative FR and relative abundance, it correctly predicted the high-impact invaders in all 47 out of 47 cases.
100%.
100% predictive power for the high-impact cases they tested. It closed that gap completely for the known problem species.
Right, 100% sounds almost suspiciously perfect in ecology. Was there a risk they just picked studies where it was known to work, or is there more evidence that the RIP score genuinely reflects the level of impact?
That's a fair question, and they addressed it directly. They tested whether the calculated RIP scores correlated with independent, existing ecological impact scoring systems, ones developed by other researchers like Laverty and colleagues, and Ricciardi and Cohen.
And did they correlate?
They found a significant positive correlation. Higher RIP scores consistently matched up with higher impact scores from these independent assessments.
So it's not just a yes-no prediction of impact.
Exactly. It also predicts the magnitude. A higher RIP score suggests a genuinely more severe ecological outcome. It seems to capture the degree of harm, not just its presence.
Which is incredibly useful for management, right?
Yeah.
If you have limited resources and maybe 2 different invasive species causing trouble.
Absolutely. They even tested this by calculating invader versus invader RIP scores for 7 pairs of co-occurring invasive species.
How did that work?
You basically use one invader as the native baseline for the other. The RIP score then tells you which of the two is likely having the bigger relative impact. And it worked. It helped identify the higher impacting species in those comparisons.
So managers could use this to prioritize which invader to target first for control measures.
Precisely. It gives a quantitative basis for those tough prioritization decisions.
This seems to have major implications for risk assessment, especially for species that haven't even invaded yet. You mentioned functional response can be measured in the lab.
Yes, that's a huge advantage. You can measure an organism's FR in controlled conditions, even before it's ever been introduced anywhere.
And you could estimate potential abundance based on its native range or similar invaded
Right,
systems.
so you could potentially calculate a preliminary RIP score for an emerging threat or a potential future invader species that are flagged in horizon scanning exercises but have no invasion history yet.
Wow. That shifts things from reactive to potentially proactive.
It really does. It provides a mechanistic, data-driven way to assess risk before the damage starts, informing preventative policies and watch lists.
And the formula itself helps understand why an invader is high impact, doesn't it? It covers different scenarios.
Yes, that's another strength. An invader could have a massive impact because its individual functional response is incredibly high, even if its abundance isn't huge. High FR, maybe lower AB.
The super efficient predator.
Or conversely, an invader might not be that efficient individually, lower FR, but it becomes overwhelmingly abundant, super high AB.
The one that just swamps the system through sheer numbers.
Exactly. The RIP formula captures both pathways. Fear FR native drives it, or ABAB native drives it, or both. It shows the mechanism behind the high score.
And having that mechanism clearly shown based on measurable factors is gold for policymakers, right? Trying to get species listed for regulation, like under EU rules, needs solid evidence.
It's exactly what's needed. It moves beyond experts think this might be bad to here are the measured FR and AD values relative to the native, giving a high RIP score indicating significant risk. It's quantifiable justification.
Okay, this sounds incredibly promising, but like any scientific advance, there must be nuances, limitations, areas needing more work. What did the authors acknowledge?
They are very clear about limitations. A key one is the current data bias.
That's so.
Well, the 47 comparisons they used were mostly focused on species already known to be high-impact invaders, because, frankly, that's where most ecological impact data exists.
Right, we study the problems.
So a crucial next step is to rigorously test the RIP metric on species that have been introduced but are considered low impact or even benign.
To confirm they consistently get low RIP scores.
Exactly. To be fully confident, we need to see RIP scores at or below 1 for those non-problematic introductions. That will really prove its reliability across the full spectrum of impacts.
Makes sense. What about the measurement challenges? Abundance AB might be simpler than numerical response NR, but isn't measuring abundance in the field still tricky?
Oh, absolutely. Abundance estimates can be highly variable. They fluctuate seasonally, spatially. Getting a reliable AB value requires careful sampling design.
Any recommendations there?
The authors stress collecting invader and native abundance data from the same locations and times, ideally in contiguous habitats, to minimize environmental differences confounding the comparison. Careful methodology is key.
And you mentioned biomass earlier. When does that become important instead of just counting numbers?
That's critical when the invader and the native analog are vastly different in size. Think of a large invasive predatory fish versus a small native goatee.
Yeah, one big food might eat as much as hundreds of tiny ones.
Right. In such cases, comparing their total biomass, grams per square meter, for example, might give a much more ecologically relevant measure of potential resource use or impact than just comparing the number of individuals. The RAP formula can use biomass ratios instead of abundance ratios then.
Good point. It adds flexibility. What about other ecological factors, like how prey react? Does RIP account for prey perhaps learning to avoid a new predator over time?
That's a fascinating area it opens up. It relates to the naive prey hypothesis, the idea that prey initially suffer high predation because they haven't evolved defenses against the novel predator.
So the invader's impact might be highest early on?
Potentially, yes. Future research could use RIP and FR measurements over time after an invasion starts. You track if the invader's realized impact, maybe reflected in the declining RIP score relative to initial predictions, lessens as prey adapt or evolve anti-predator behaviors. It gives us a tool to study that dynamic.
Interesting. And the metric inherently handles that trade-off. We talked about lots of small things versus a few big things.
It seems to, yes. The formula balances the per capita efficiency, FR, against the population density, AB or biomass. You can have cases like the invasive mysid shrimp, Hemysis anomala. It's small, but its FR can be so high that it generates a high RIP score despite its size.
So extremely high efficiency can overcome being small.
Conversely, a large but less efficient predator might only have a high RIP if it achieves very high abundance or biomass. The formula structure accommodates these different routes to high impact.
In this framework, FR times abundance relative to a native. It applies broadly, beyond just predators and shrimp.
That's the claim. Since pretty much all organisms consume resources in some way, whether it's predators eating prey, herbivores eating plants, filter feeders consuming plankton, even plants competing for nutrients or light, you can, in principle, derive functional response analogs and measure abundance or biomass.
So potentially applicable across taxonomic groups.
That's the potential, yeah. From crustaceans and mollusks to fish and plants, as long as you can meaningfully measure those relative per capita effects and relative abundance biomass, the RIP framework should provide predictive insight.
Okay, let's try to summarize the big takeaway here. If you had to distill the core message about the relative impact potential metric, what would it be?
I'd say the RIP metric offers a really powerful blend of simplicity and ecological realism. By combining the invader's per capita performance, FR, with its population success, AB, and crucially comparing both relative to an appropriate native species, it gives us a rapid, quantitative, and seemingly highly reliable tool.
A tool to predict not just if an invader will cause harm,
But also the likely magnitude of that ecological harm. And it seems to work across a wide range of species types. It feels like a significant step towards the predictive power we've desperately needed in invasion ecology.
moving from reaction to potential prediction, that definitely feels like progress.
Mhm.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you, the listener, to think about. We've heard how vital that native comparator is for the RIP calculation. But what happens when an invader arrives in an ecosystem where it has no close native analog? No species performing a similar ecological role?
That's a really interesting question.
Mm.
Some research suggests that this very lack of a native counterpart, this functional distinctiveness, might itself be a strong indicator of high potential impact, even before you calculate anything.
So, the novelty itself is a red flag. Thinking about policy then, if we can calculate a high RIP score for a potential invader before it even becomes widespread and abundant, how could managers use that information proactively? Could it justify stronger, earlier interventions to prevent establishment, even when the invader is still rare, based purely on its potential relative impact? It shifts the resource allocation question significantly, doesn't it? Something to consider.